Okay, hey everyone, and welcome to the Working Wellbeing podcast. Really excited about today's conversation. We have on the line Sharon Livermore, MBE, who is the director of recruitment, right, and then also
Yep.
the founder of Domestic Abuse Education. Um, hey,
Hi, nice to be on here. Thank you.
lovely to meet you. And I'm going to get you to introduce yourselves in just a second. Part of the reason why I'm excited about this is we've actually let you sneak onto the podcast because we were chatting about it before. Typically, we talk to wellbeing leaders within different organisations, not so much to subject matter experts, but
Yeah.
based on the work that you do and the importance of this subject, and the fact that I don't hear that much talked about this sort of subject and the subjects that
Mhm.
we'll get into, I'm sure, in the workplace, but their overlap with wellbeing. I was really keen to include you with this series, so thank you so much for coming on.
No, thank you for having me. And I think, you touched on it there. Um, there isn't enough being spoken about around domestic abuse. There's not enough conversations. It's still a taboo subject. So I'm really grateful of the opportunity to come on here today, to hopefully empower others to, start their journey on helping their employees really that may be experiencing it.
Yeah, appreciate it. So let's get into it. I should let you introduce yourself properly. I read the title from LinkedIn, but how would you describe yourself and your role and the work that you do?
Yeah, no, I mean, you pretty much got it spot on.
Mhm.
So yes, I am the founder of two businesses, obviously one of them being Cameo Recruitment, but more importantly for today, we're here to talk about domestic abuse education.
Mm.
I set up domestic abuse education a year ago, although originally I was doing my domestic abuse work under the banner of Cameo Recruitment, but it just grew so big that people were confused who I was. And
Yeah,
they were saying, well, you're in talking to us, but actually, who are you? What's your brand that's behind you?
yeah,
So I guess for me, I have a personal reason as to do what I do.
hmm,
And if you're happy for me to share that, I'm more than happy to explain my
yeah,
journey with you.
hmm,
So, back in 2015, I came extremely close to losing my life at the hands of my then husband, due to domestic abuse. Work was my only safe space. It was the
right,
only place that I was away from him. And what happened was, it is quite hard to listen to, but it is my reality. So,
hmm,
a bit of a trigger warning here before I share. But basically, what happened was I met him on a sales course when I was at work. He was the person in the room that was pouring the water, really charming, really friendly. And as you do, I thought this person's amazing. Let's start a relationship. So we did. We then got engaged, and on the run up to the wedding, there were signs. I'm not going to sit here and say there wasn't, but I brushed them under the carpet. I was like, we're stressed, the wedding's coming up, etc. It was actually on our wedding night that things really changed. And he poured potpourri over my head in my wedding dress and said, how dare you wear that dress? And I remember thinking, hang on a minute, I don't know what's going on. And I think at that point, my reality just was completely confused. And of course, I was so ashamed to then go to family and friends and
yeah,
say, look, this has just happened. You've just seen me marry this man, and this is what's happened. So I lived through what I would call 18 months of, for me, it was pretty much hell,
yeah,
experiencing every form of abuse apart from economic abuse, to the point where I lost my identity, my family, my friends. And I just, I hit that wall. And one day I just went, enough is enough. So I reached out, actually, I was in the workplace, and said to my boss at the time, I'm done. I need to get out of this situation.
yeah.
So they did cover for me, and I was able to go to the police. But because it was 2015, that was when the laws were just changing on coercive control.
Okay.
But I had no physical bruising on me at that point. And because the laws weren't fully in, it was hard to get anything kind of prosecuted. So he got bailed.
Yeah.
What he then did was plotted what would have been my kidnap and murder. He drove to my home and ankle grinded through my house door to steal my spare car key. I obviously left work one evening, went to my car, and we had an ongoing joke with one of my colleagues. My car was newer than hers, so it's November, it's cold, your car's a bit misty, but mine always used to demist before hers. And that evening, she drove off, and I was left sitting in my car in a dark car park, going, "Okay, hang on." Look behind me in the seat, thinking, "Is he there?" He wasn't. But then I smelled aftershave, and I put my hand behind me in my the footwell, and I felt my picnic blanket that had been in the boot. Walked round to the boot, and he was in the boot of my car with knives and cable ties. Um, I managed to flee. I managed to run. And thankfully, one of my colleagues and two gentlemen came out. He did catch me, but the timing for my sake was in my favour. And obviously, he then fled off in my vehicle. But what he'd done was spent those 3 days plotting what would have been my murder. I had a hatchback, so he was able to loosen the seats, and obviously his plan was to come through. But fortunately for me, I did not drive off in that car. And once I'd processed what had happened to me, which obviously took time, I realised that I didn't want anyone else to ever go through what I did. And I realised that work was the one place that I could have got support. Nothing to do with the company I worked for at all, because they weren't educated, neither was I.
Yeah.
But if I'd have had the opportunity before that point to, speak to support services whilst I was at work, and that's just one example of something an organisation can do, it would have made the difference to me leaving that relationship and not having all of the support services in place. So I do use my lived experience throughout all of my sessions. I do talk about that because I do believe it's important that others can really relate to the person they're speaking to, and it's changing lives with what I'm doing.
Yeah. Wow. Well, there's a first 5 minutes. No, thank you so much for sharing that story. I've not heard that before. So,
No.
yeah, shocking. And I'm sorry you had to go through that.
Thank you. No, and I think, you're acting or responding, shall I say, in exactly the same way that everybody does, because it's that shocking moment where people go, it was like a horror film. Yeah, it was. I can't change that. And that, like I said, was my reality. But I think now being able to empower other people, it is part of my healing process too, because every time I educate somebody, I think, well, you're hopefully not going to go through what I did, or you're going to get out of a situation if you're in one. And that's, it's something that makes me happy, and it's my purpose. But by doing what I'm doing, it's helping lots of other people too.
Yeah. There's so much I want to ask you about this.
Feel free, ask anything.
Where to start? You mentioned in there this feeling of shame in the initial instance, and the first thing that popped to my head, I don't know if this is correct or not, but is this idea, and I come across this a lot in the world of well-being and resilience and all this sort of stuff, that we shift a lot of the responsibility onto the individual. You made that decision, so you should own it. You should take responsibility
for it,
without looking at all the other factors that contributed to that. And the responsibility, I mean, look, the only responsibility for the story that you've just told lies with your ex-husband, not with you.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Different, right?
I think you're 100% touching on all the right points. Domestic abuse is the choice that somebody makes to control another individual. It is not the victim's fault. It is the perpetrator that's inflicting that control. But if you imagine you've been controlled, you've lost your confidence, all of these different things build up a picture in the victim's head. And it's really hard to then kind of go, no, I deserve better, because you're being told you don't, or all of these things. So you're constantly battling against your own thoughts. And then when you add the gaslighting in there as well, where someone's saying, well, that didn't happen, and then you're doubting that and going, well, did it happen? Was it that bad? It's a really, really hard place, a hard headspace to be in, and that's where obviously my mental health was impacted. I was having panic attacks all the time. I had a really high level of anxiety, and that's where mental health links in as well, with this side of things. But it's really hard to understand that it's not your fault when you're in it. And I guess for me, like, the biggest thing, as I said before, was being ashamed. I was so ashamed to go to my friends and family and say, because we had an amazing wedding day. It was perfect. It was your tick box of everything. And then that evening, for things to really change, it was just, I guess I felt that people wouldn't believe me because they'd been there and seen that side of things. But of course they would have done, but it was just my thoughts in my own head at that point.
Yeah. No, and I know that, I mean, that's at the extreme end, right? But I'm even thinking what you're talking about, that, like, people who find themselves stressed or burnt out at work, and there'll be different triggers for that. Some of it will be relationship related. Absolutely. Some of it will be something completely different, but it cannot just be all down to them just to sort themselves out and get themselves back on their feet. They've got a responsibility. Everyone's got a level of responsibility, I guess. But,
of course.
But what about the role that, I mean, you talked about the link to the workplace. What about the role that teams can play, or a manager can play, or a whole organisation can play in terms of helping?
100%. And I think, that's why it's so great to be on here talking to you today, because I don't think in all honesty, workplaces, employees, managers know the difference they can make.
Mm.
And it's huge. You know, I do this day in, day out, and I speak to organisations, and I have people that disclose at my sessions.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm speaking to one that I've spoken to today that I met at an event that disclosed about 4 months ago. Had a conversation with her this morning, still giving her advice. She's signposted to support services, but I'm speaking to her as well, and helping her with her situation. But we're not talking about huge budgets. We're not talking about hours and hours of work, because without sounding awful, I've put things in place that many solicitors across the UK probably don't like me, because I've created a policy which is a free domestic abuse policy.
Yeah.
It's a template policy and guidance notes that any organisation of any size in any sector can use to start them on, obviously, on the journey, or if they've already got a policy, they can use it to make sure that their policy is as up to date as possible.
Yeah.
That was created in, oh gosh, time flies, 2021, alongside the Employers Initiative on Domestic Abuse, the Domestic Abuse Alliance, and an HR department.
Yeah.
And every year we review it, and it goes for a legal check review by Hogan Lovells. They're a global law firm.
Yeah.
So it kind of took away that stopping point, shall we say, because there was a lot of organisations that I was doing my sessions for, you know, the learning educational sessions, and they would say, what do we do next? And of course, businesses, organisations need policies or guidance so that everyone within that organisation is treated in the same way and fairly. And managers know what they can offer. They don't have to run to HR. It might be that they can give flexibility without having to scale it up the ladder at that point. So it does make a huge difference. And if people have got that for free, then there's almost no reason why they won't start that journey. Of course, you know, we do have to pay for training. We do have to pay for the ongoing marketing that goes behind it and things like that to make sure the message is or continues to be heard, because you can't have a policy and guidance as a tick box. It needs to be implemented and continue to be worked with, shall we say. But like I say, it's amazing to watch these businesses and organisations that I'm working with on their journeys. And of course I stay in touch with them, and the success stories or I hear, it's just, yeah, for me, it's really heartwarming to know that these people are being supported by the organisations.
Yeah. Yeah. And why would an organisation not do it? Does it? I'm trying to think. Like, does it open them up to any legal liability if they've got policies around this? Or
I think it's the fear around it, because the pushback that I get, and rightfully so, when I'm doing my sessions, I have managers that say, "But I don't want to deal with this because it's scary." And it's not on me if something happens to them.
It's not my part of my job.
Yeah. And I'm like, I get it, but I make it 100% clear that in an organisation, your role is to refer to support. So all of the sessions that I have a CPD course. It's an accredited course, which is for HR managers and wellbeing leads, mental health first aiders if they want to then take on the domestic abuse as well. They don't have to, obviously. And then line managers. And then we do the lunch and learn sessions for all employees, because it's really important that every employee is educated, because it will be the person sitting next to you on your desk, not the HR manager that's going to see the signs. But all of those sessions that I deliver, we talk about what is domestic abuse, because unfortunately people don't know all of the different tactics that are used, and there's so many. So we talk.
I was actually going to ask about that, only because
feel free.
I'm interested. I don't know, because you mentioned there are forms of abuse, right?
Yes.
Would you be able to share some of those?
Yeah, just a few examples of those. Obviously, we have the economic side, the economic abuse. 95% of people that experience domestic abuse will experience economic abuse.
Wow. Right.
Because if you think about it, having finances, having a job, all of the things that come under the economic side give you freedom. And if you don't have those finances, how do you leave a relationship? So it's a very, very strong tactic. Isolation as well. Isolation is a key tactic, because if you take away somebody's support network, then they're so much easier to control. They also don't have the person to go to say, do you know what? This person did this to me last night. Now your friends or family will go, that's not okay. And then you might say, well, actually, oh, is it not okay? Because if you've been gaslighted. But if you don't have those people to go to, you just continue living your life in that bubble that you're in. Another example as well, obviously we have the coercive control, the emotional abuse as well. Those areas linger with people for longer. They are the ones that people will struggle to get over the most, because if you imagine you've been told you're ugly every single day 100 times by the perpetrator, however confident you are You lose that confidence. And when you lose confidence, you will comply. And then, of course, we have the physical and the sexual abuse as well. And they're just a few. There's many others that I could talk through. But we start the session really by talking about that, because it's really eye-opening for people to understand how many different tactics can be used. We then move on to the fact that it happens to everybody. So something I'm really passionate about. I identify as a female. My perpetrator identified as a male. However, my belief is that nobody should be abused. So we talk about how it impacts different genders, different cultures, different backgrounds. So the sessions are fully inclusive, and I encourage organisations to invite everybody along and make sure that they are aware that the sessions are fully inclusive for everybody. Business stats, why is it a workplace issue? And this is what I get asked a lot as well. 75% of people who experience domestic abuse will experience it in the workplace. And that can be from your phone. If you think about it, you have your phone with you probably 24 hours a day. Therefore, you're accountable 24 hours a day to your perpetrator. It could be emails as well, and the perpetrator turning up at the workplace. And then there is a financial cost. So it's £7,245 per survivor on lost output to the employer. So when you're looking at it like that, when you're saying to me, why are employers not doing this? There's a financial reason. If people want to do it for that reason, I'd like to think it's for well-being. But obviously, if people are going to do it for that reason,
a moral obligation.
You would think so, right? But, if someone's doing it because of financial reasons, at least they're doing something. And then we talk about the signs, what we're looking for, what signs are we spotting, and then how we respond to that person, because conversations aren't easy. What language do we use? Where do we go? How do we do it? And then most importantly, how do we refer somebody to support? What support services are we looking for? We need to get a person-centered approach. So I work with businesses on how to do that. But when I explain that to an organisation, they go, oh, yeah, I'm happy to do that. Yeah, that's fine. I can do that. And I'm like, exactly. But it's that fear thing. And I get it. You're talking about potentially life and death situations. But just by following that, recognise, respond, refer, you can potentially save someone's life anyway. So, it's about being that person that recognises it and has the conversation.
Well, I don't actually think, again, you tell me if I'm wrong, but I don't actually think the things that dissuade people would be the more obvious extreme end of things. Like if you saw someone was being physically abused, you'd like to think most people would say, are you okay? Step in. But when it's the lower level stuff, right? When it's just
the signs that
and it looks like a fallout with a husband or a wife and and you don't want to get involved with that. It's like, that's not my relationship. I don't want to get involved with that sort of thing.
No, I think you're right. I think the thing
conversations maybe that or seemingly awkward conversations that would put people off, but they can lead to so much more.
100%. I mean, we're human and we don't like to pry into each other's business because we don't think it is our duty. But domestic abuse is everyone's business, and we have a duty of care to those around us. We are looking out for things, changes in behaviour. We sit next to our colleagues. Of course, hybrid working has changed things and it is a little bit harder in some scenarios, but we do know our colleagues around us. And if someone all of a sudden is becoming very upset, very tearful, even aggressive, that's one that I talk about. And people go, well, why would someone become aggressive in the workplace and start snapping at people? And I'm like, because they're being controlled. If they're being controlled at home, they've got this pent up energy because they're not allowed to answer back. They're not allowed to do anything. So if someone walks over and says, oh, you've made a mistake, someone might snap and go, no, I haven't, and that's not because they mean it. It's because they've got all of this defense mechanisms that are in place. There's so many other things as well that we're looking out for. It's emails, are they constantly emailing people back that their partner or obviously domestic abuse can be extended family members as well. That's something to be mindful of. Are they constantly on their phone? Or were they the person that at lunchtime used to come and sit with you, but they've met somebody new and then you say, do you want to go for a walk? No, I can't. I need to message Sarah or Steve or whoever. Is it they met someone new and they just want, it's that honeymoon period, right? And that's okay too. But is it leading on to other things? Do they have to be on their phone to them constantly at lunchtime because that person's controlling that they don't want them to go and, make connections with other people they work with? And they're just a few. People's performance will potentially be impacted. And one of the most common things is absenteeism and lateness, leaving work early as well, just to make things easier for them to get home on time. So we're building a picture of somebody. And I'm not saying if somebody, turns up feeling a bit under the weather one day that you need to go over and go, right, what's going on in your relationship? That's not right at
Yeah.
all. But if you're building a picture up and you recognize this, it's about then going, let's go for a walk. Where's your safe space? A meeting room. Shall we go for a coffee? And just saying, I've noticed you're not yourself. Is there something you want to talk about? Some people will never disclose. Some people will live in abusive relationships forever. But at least by saying, I've noticed that you don't seem to be yourself, you're giving them a lifeline. And you may not see the impact of that. But I know when I was a victim, if someone had said to me, are you okay? I probably wouldn't have disclosed that first time because it would have been kind of off the cuff.
Mhm.
But maybe I would have gone home going, oh, actually, that person is actually genuinely interested.
Yeah.
And I might then have gone back and said a couple of days later, can we have a conversation? So I think it's, you're not going to change people's lives overnight. You're not going to be able to have that impact, but you can add so much value to them by just having a conversation.
Yeah, no. I do a lot of work around mental health and,
Okay.
similar sort of things that you talk to people, particularly line managers, right? And
Yeah.
I always feel a bit sorry for line managers because it's all their fault, right? They're responsible for everything. But it could
Yeah.
be champions as well. It could be anyone. It could be a
Yeah.
colleague, as you've laid out. But I often use the line responsible to, not responsible for. Responsible to have the conversation and to listen.
Yeah.
But you shouldn't feel that you're responsible for solving every single problem because often
Absolutely.
they can't, right? That's beyond the realms of
No.
their
It's not in their
capability. Or
remit,
yeah,
and
yeah,
it's
yeah,
not safe. It's not safe for them
yeah,
to do so
absolutely.
either. That's the thing. It's not, as much as we want to,
Mm,
scoop that person up and take them home and make
mm,
sure they're okay. We can't do that. And actually, we aren't trained to do those risk assessments at that level. It's the specialist services that can, and
mm,
that's who we're referring to. Even if if we need to, we call the police. But all of the support services are able to do the risk assessments
yeah,
to look at that individual and see how much risk they're at. Statistically, when you leave a relationship is when you're most in danger, of course, because the control is being taken away from that from the perpetrator. So what safety things do they need in place? And that comes from the police putting in what needs to be done. It
mhm,
comes from people like Women's Aid, doing their risk assessments, and many other organisations across the UK stepping
mm,
in and helping. But that's what we're doing. We're creating the opportunity for people to get this support
yeah,
before they leave a relationship, or just get advice to be
yeah.
able to see what their life would look like if they left. And then they may decide to stay. We can't make people leave, but you're giving them options that they don't have if we don't do this.
Fascinating. You mentioned the difficulty that hybrid working brings. I mean,
Yes.
there's added complexity, right? Because another one of the symptoms that you
Yeah.
talked about was always being on your phone. Now,
Mhm.
if that were a symptom for everybody, I think everybody would
Yeah.
fall foul of that
Yeah.
symptom because everyone's
Oh
addicted
my
to
God.
their
Yeah.
phones
Yeah.
nowadays, right? But do you feel like it's maybe harder to spot some of these things now than it has been previously, or do you think it's just a different challenge?
Oh, I like to think it's a different challenge,
Yeah.
but it is harder in reality.
Mm,
Obviously, with hybrid working, if someone's fully remote, it is really, really hard
mm,
to obviously spot signs. If someone's hybrid, they're still coming in the office, so we can still do wellbeing checks as we should be. We should still be keeping in contact with people. The one thing that I say with hybrid workers or people that are fully remote, if we do have concerns, what you have to remember is, I'm speaking to you today. I could have a perpetrator standing behind my screen listening to what I'm saying. So we can't go on to these Teams meetings or phone calls and say, I've noticed you don't seem to be yourself. Is everything okay at home? You can't say that because
no.
the perpetrator may be listening. But what you can do, and this is what I encourage organisations to do, is give a reason for someone to come into the workplace to do a wellbeing check. So that could be, just one example is we're just having an HR audit and we need every person to come in person to bring their right to work documents just so we can get them scanned and get them on the system.
Yeah.
So then if a perpetrator is listening or reading the email, it is a valid reason. There's many other reasons you could come up with. It could be that you're having an open day or, whichever.
Yeah.
But that's just one example. You
Mm,
then get them into the workplace, into the safe space,
mm,
and you have a conversation there.
mm.
So that's something we really need to be mindful of, because if you start sending emails to them saying, oh, this, we've noticed this, the perpetrator will probably step in
Yeah.
and try and get them to lose their job because they know that that is the support that they are going to receive. So we need to be really, really careful in how we communicate with people. But there are still signs, if somebody doesn't look themselves, if
Mhm.
someone looks panicky,
Yeah.
if someone's got their video off all the time,
Yeah.
it might be that they used to have it on and then all of a sudden it's off all the time. Is there a reason for that? So there are still things we can do. It does make it a little bit harder though.
And you could try to create some virtual spaces, sorry, some safe spaces virtually. Now, I know that's not
Yeah,
ideal, but for example, people are on Teams meetings back to back to back, but
yeah,
the agenda's packed, so
yes, yeah.
there's no time to
No.
ask, are you all right? And I wonder whether just having catch-ups regularly with people within your team where there's no
Absolutely.
agenda and you can just talk,
No, no, I think you should do that once a
Yeah.
week. In all honesty, I have remote with my recruitment side. I have remote workers, and yeah, we do. I've just come off a Teams this morning with one of my remote workers.
Yeah.
He's just come back from holiday. Right, let's check in. How was your holiday? Right, are you good for the rest of this week? Let's catch up again next week.
Mm.
So I think if you don't, if you're speaking to someone once every 2 or 3 months, you're not going to notice anything anyway. But as a duty of care, we need to be checking in with our employees regularly, to make sure that they are okay, because in the office, of course, you walk in and the team that are in the office with me every morning, I'm like, morning, how is everyone, do you want a coffee? And you can tell, you get a sense of it. People show their emotions a little bit more, but we still have that duty of care, as you say, to people that are working remotely, to make sure that we don't forget them as such just because they're not physically present in the office every day.
Yeah. It just needs to be more conscious, right?
Yeah.
'Cause you're not just going to bump into that person in a corridor, but
No.
that doesn't. So it needs to be a more conscious decision to put the call
Yeah.
in the calendar.
And book it monthly. You can do
Yeah.
repeat meetings. That's what I do. Is we put repeat meetings into diaries so that every Tuesday morning, once a month we have a monthly meeting that everybody has to come into the office for, irrelevant of what days they work and what they do. The Wednesday every month they come in, we sit together, we go through things, and that's an opportunity for everybody to kind of rebond as well, because it might not be me that notices something if it was one of my team. It might be one of my other team members, because they're all trained on domestic abuse, and not just that, mental health and things as well, that says actually you don't seem to be yourself.
Yeah.
So we really need to be mindful that it is everybody's duty as such to recognize those signs as well.
Absolutely. I want to come back to that. I've got more questions. I've got more questions about the responsibility thing. I just wanted to ask you about something that I came across very recently, and it was a bit of a light bulb moment for me. You talked about the different, in a previous answer, you talked about the different forms and the different perpetrators of abuse as well. And, obviously the one that you hear most about is male to female.
Yes.
And then you talked about, but it can also be the other way around, and there's different culturally. I feel like I'm lucky enough, I believe, to have not been touched personally by anything of that nature yet, touch wood. I hope it doesn't happen, but or anyone who I know hugely that I can think of off the top of my head. But I was having a conversation with someone recently, and they were talking about the abuse that exists between children and parents. Now that is
child to parent abuse.
Now that is something that I've come across. Again, not personally, but
No,
absolutely know people who've been affected by that. Is that something that you talk about?
So I don't specifically talk about it. So I work specifically with businesses on domestic abuse. However, I am partnered with many other organisations that work in different spaces. So we're partnered with PEGS. And they're an organisation that deliver training on child to parent abuse. And it is something that, again, it's another subject that people don't talk about. And in all honesty, I hadn't heard anything about it myself. It was only because I work in this space that I came across PEGS. It kind of opened my eyes. I was like, really, does that happen? For me, domestic abuse happens. I know it does because I've experienced it. But I guess, and also I'm a mum, I never thought that there would be a thing, child to parent abuse. My bond with my children is the strongest bond in the world. But it doesn't mean that everyone has that. And I think when I actually did a training course with PEGS, and it really opened my eyes, and it was actually, it was sad, but all these situations are sad. But I do think organisations need to have training on that as well, because I can't, I don't have experience in it myself, but I can only imagine what it would feel like to be a parent, and that you would have that ashamed side, I'm sure, as well, to say, look, my own child's doing this to me. But we need to make it okay for people to speak about any kind of abuse they're experiencing, irrelevant whether it's from a child, a partner, an extended family member, or whoever. But it's a really good point, because there's so many different aspects around abuse, not just domestic abuse, that we need to be mindful of.
I just thought I'd ask about it because it was I came across it the other day, and it was
and
in a way some of the things you've been talking. I feel like when it's a child, even more trapped
Yeah.
because you know
Well, of course you are,
you
because you
can
have a
divorce
duty of
your
care.
you can divorce your
Can't
partner,
divorce
but
your
it's
child.
no, they're always going to be family, right? Like it or
Yeah,
not.
and
Yeah.
you would want to always help, even
Mm,
in abusive
absolutely.
situations, domestic abuse situations. For me, I went through physical abuse, really awful physical abuse, but I kept believing he'll change, he'll change. If I do this, he'll change. But I can only relate that to if that was your child, you would be hoping more than anything that they would change, because you
Mhm.
have an unconditional love to your child. You don't have an unconditional love to like for me, for my husband, it's not unconditional. It wasn't there when I was born. It was something that developed. So you can kind of peel that back. But if it's a child, I can only imagine how horrific it is. But we do need to talk about it. You're absolutely right to bring it up. We do need organisations to almost give the same options that the guidance gives for domestic abuse. If people are allowed flexible working, they should have it because of this. If people are allowed to go to counselling during work time for domestic abuse, they should be allowed to for child to parent abuse. So,
Mm.
that it is about working together with these types of situations.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you feel these? Sorry, bouncing around a little bit. Do you feel these safe spaces have always got to be one on one? Because again, if I was going to broaden it, again, I heard it was at a conference recently, and they were
Mhm.
talking about the importance of discussing difficult topics in the workplace and not, brushing them under the carpet. So it could be domestic abuse, it could be the war in Israel, it could
Yes.
be politics,
Yeah.
like
I love politics.
difficult conversations that
Yeah.
there's kind of two options. You either ignore them entirely and think,
Yeah.
well, that's nothing to do with the workplace specifically,
Mhm.
or you embrace having conversations about them. Now, they were encouraging people to have conversations about them, which is
Yeah.
great. But the questions still remain in my head, like how? Now, Lee, you've talked about one to one, and I get that. Is there anything that perhaps an organization should be doing to create,
Yeah.
I don't know, like the broader sense of psychological safety for those
Absolutely.
conversations to
Yeah.
exist?
It's a really good question. It's about education.
Mm,
It is about educating and creating a culture in that workplace
yeah.
where people feel, one thing that I get told is that they know that their organisation will support them.
Mm,
But how do you let these people know? It is from education.
yeah.
And it's also yeah, I guess it comes from, often the senior management needs to be on board, and then it filters down. That's not to say people on the different levels within an organisation can't have an impact, but you need them to buy into it, because it can't be a tick box. If you've got a tick box, it won't change.
Right.
If you embed it within your well-being strategies as well, which often a lot of people do, and make sure that you're including it in your inductions for people. We do work around domestic abuse. We have a policy and guidance should you need it. And then internal comms as well. You need them on board because they need to be championing different days, White Ribbon Day. We've got the 16 days of activism. So we're not asking people to recreate something. They can use external organisations and social media to create their internal, the process they want to go through. But I think what I've seen personally is, when I first start talking, people's faces are like, oh, why am I in here? It's another lunch and learn session. I've got things to do. I can't be bothered. And I'm like, I get it. I'm a busy person as well. And I understand if there was a topic that maybe I didn't see value in, I'd be thinking, why am I in here? I need to go and have a Teams meeting with whoever.
Mhm.
But actually, once I start talking and once we start looking straight away at the forms of abuse, and when I talk about the stats, 1 in 4 women, 1 in 7 men,
Mm,
2 women a week. I'm sorry, that's actually changed. 1 woman every 5 days will lose her life,
yeah.
and then 1 man every 3 weeks.
Mm,
So when we're looking at it like that, people go, oh. So it's engaging them
mm,
and then getting them to realise that they're not in there for a tick box. They can genuinely leave that room feeling empowered to be able to feel they have the knowledge to start a conversation and signpost.
mm,
And if you give someone that confidence to do it, it's amazing how many people go, yeah, I can do that.
yeah.
And then it becomes part of it. And it might be that, if you've got people that are the CPD qualification trained,
Mm,
they might, come together and have a group that they then go, right, once a quarter, let's look together to see what we can do for marketing to raise awareness over the next month. Can we do a team building thing and raise money?
yeah.
Can we do a bake sale in the office and
Mm,
all the money go to an abuse charity, for example?
yeah.
So it's how you embed it. But
Mm,
all of these conversations are awkward.
mhm,
All the training sessions, people probably don't want to go to,
mm,
and people will shy away from. But I think by making people go as much as you can, you can't force someone to go to a session on anything.
Yeah.
And obviously, if they are being abused, they may not want to go. If they're going to be triggered, they may not want to go. That's fine. But by encouraging, I think is the right word, them to go along. I think you'll find that it just creates that culture, and then cultures grow, right? People grow with the culture and they develop with the culture, and before you know it, you've got this amazing well-being culture with not just domestic abuse. You've got menopause being spoken about, you've got mental health, you've got all of the other subjects that people have to go through in their life, grief, all of those things.
Yeah, absolutely. You answered my question already. I was going to ask you about whether I was going to ask you about whether to make it mandatory, but I think I'm with you, right? You know, that even that word mandatory sounds
I think the government needs to make it mandatory for organisations like health and safety policies to have a domestic abuse policy or guidance in their workplace. Absolutely. That's something that I champion for. I have had conversations with members of parliament about that. Obviously with the change or potential change, who knows what's going to happen with politics. That is something I'm very, very passionate about. But I think when it comes to the education piece, it's really hard to make it mandatory because there will be people that will be triggered by it if they've experienced it. There'll be people that are experiencing it and don't want to go or can't go because they can't be seen to go. If they're working from home, they can't go on to it because the perpetrator's there, for example. So you can't make it mandatory. You can do things like record it. So I do allow organisations to record my sessions and then they can upload it onto their intranet for internal purposes, so that if somebody is being abused but can't go to the session because obviously they're being watched by their perpetrator, they can go onto it at a safe time and watch it as well. So there are different things that I do with organisations to allow people to to watch it when they can,
make it more accessible.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I've got you. Okay. And then I really wanted to ask, this is a question I was going to ask before about the, so we talked about this before, but obviously the primary audience for this particular podcast are well-being leaders, right? So these amazing individuals from all sorts of different backgrounds who have some sort of responsibility, whether that's a dedicated role, whether that's part of their role in HR or health and safety or something like that. Again, I think you've already kind of touched on pieces around this, but to what extent do you feel that the work that you do in domestic violence should be a part of that role, and what should they be responsible for in an ideal world?
In an ideal world, well, first of all, thank you to everyone who's listening. I think 100% it needs to be included in organisations. I think it is scary if you're somebody that's never, had experience in this area, and you're working in wellbeing. It can be quite overwhelming because you may open up, without saying a can of worms, and you may get people disclosed. That's often what happens, but that's good, right? Because it means that these people can come forward and be signposted to support. So what I always say is I work with organisations depending on where they are on their journey. So if somebody's already had some training, they've got a policy in place, they'll often get me in as a guest speaker to share my story as part of their, bringing it to life again. Let's remind you all we've got a policy in place. Other people need hand-holding right at the start, all the way through their journey. And I do that as well. So I work with each individual organisation, depending on where they're at on their journey, to make it as easy as possible. But with regards to the lunch and learn sessions, I mean, they're so easy to set up. I go in person, I do them virtually. I also do them at random times. So I'm working with the Royal Mail at the moment through their union. It's directly with the union rather than Royal Mail. And I'm going to be doing overnight sessions. I think one's at 3 o'clock in the morning, one of them's at 6 o'clock, just to reach the shift workers. So I work, that's what I'm trying to say is, I work one-to-one with those organisations to make sure they know there is a process, we follow a process. If we are going to do a lunch and learn session, we need to already have in place what it looks like if somebody does disclose. So who do they come to in that workplace? And has that person or have that team or whoever they are got the list of support services that they might have to refer to? So we make sure we've got all of these things kind of covered before we take it to the next step. But it's a journey. It's the same as any other journey, the mental health journey, the menopause journey, all of these journeys that we're going on. But I guess for me, I give people that confidence to know that what they're doing is making a difference and I'm there to support them through it.
Yeah. And what'd be really great is if it was locked into some more formal education. So I know that, one of the things that perhaps the wellbeing sector is lacking somewhat are formalised qualifications to become a wellbeing leader. There are some out there, right? And there's some routes that you can go down and whatnot. But but I've not seen a lot about this subject or some of the other subjects that you've mentioned. That's often bundled under,
They kind of come under
there are
the
also a
carpet.
load of other things that have got days, awareness days, and you should do them.
Yeah.
But the risk with that is then they see that as tied
Awareness days,
to
and
August the 1st and not something that they need to be thinking about all year
no.
round, right?
Awareness days don't work, and actually awareness days can probably do more damage if you don't have a policy or know how to refer somebody. If you put out, do you know what, we're going to put that we are supporting I don't know, Violence Against Men Day, for example. We're going to put out that we're doing that internally and on our social media. Then they get someone that comes forward.
Yeah.
What are they going to do with that person? Because they won't know. They're not educated to know, oh, we need to have a referral pathway. What is that referral pathway for someone that comes forward that identifies as male in this area? What is that pathway? So actually, by doing that, it can actually be really negative because you can encourage people to come forward.
Yeah.
And of course, it's good that they are coming forward, but you might not give them the right information. And that's where not having that referral pathway, the list of support services, which are in the guidance and policy that I have, which gets updated every year, that they could literally get it out and go, right, okay, we need to refer to this person.
Yeah.
So, it's not a tick box thing at all. For me, that's something I'm, like I say, very, very passionate about. It's ongoing and it always needs to develop. And that's why we change and update our policy and guidance notes every year. They get annually reviewed and we include new things. We change them to tweaks depending on what the law has changed and things like that as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is the sort of thing maybe that organizations, it's because it's difficult, right? So they should be looking at topics like this, but it's easier to buy a mental health app or the latest AI thing or whatever, because it seems scalable and it seems easy and all the rest of it. What I really like about what you're talking about is you are trying to make it simple to understand. We have this policy. It's free. You can implement it. There is training.
I worked with so many organisations that had nothing in place. There's testimonials on my website from different organisations, some that people may know of that are at different parts of their journey. River Island, Channel 4, trying to think of Royal British Legion, for example. They're at different parts of their journey, but it's simple. And every single person that works with me goes, well, it's not complicated. I've worked in the commercial world since I left college. So that's where my area is. That's my knowledge. I run 2 businesses. I know time is money. I know there isn't, we couldn't send 20 employees, for example, on a full day domestic abuse training. People are going to say no, which is why the CPD accredited course is 2 hours with a Q&A as well. But that's enough for people to go away, that was amazing. I know what I'm doing. They get the handouts, they get a brochure with handouts so they can refer to them as well. So, and it works because organisations go, oh, yeah, we can provide you with 10 people for 2 hours. That's fine. So, it is the way of my working is very much adapted to organisations of all sizes and all sectors because time is precious, but time well spent can save lives.
Yeah, it's great. I want to finish up with, I don't know where to finish up. I'll tell you one thing, again, total right turn here, like complete 180, but
fire away.
I was chatting to your colleague before today's conversation, and one of the things that came up very briefly, which I wanted to ask you about, was, do you ever get anybody who, what's the best word, like self-discloses, like isn't aware from the abuser's side, like isn't aware? Well, I'm sure you get plenty of people.
They're a perpetrator. They're a perpetrator. Yes, I have. The perpetrator side is actually really hard, and it's a very grey area. There's a lot of talks going on. I've been to a number of them with specialists in different areas, because perpetrators aren't really likely to come forward and go, hey, I'm doing this. However, what I will tell you is I have a really good example of this. I was doing a session about 6 months ago. And a lovely gentleman, and he did identify as a male in the room. At the end, it was a small group. I think there's probably about 20 people in the room. And he put his hand up and said, can I ask you a question? I went, yeah, of course. We're all in this room. What we speak about in this room, please do keep it, confidential. And he said, I think I may be perpetrating. And of course I went, oh, okay, right, safe space. What's going on? I said, can you elaborate on that? What do you mean? And he said, well, I'm happily married. Well, I think I am. I've been married to my wife for 30 years. And, but the economic side, I control all of the finances, I always have. And she asks me for money when she needs it. Is that okay? And I went, well, have you ever asked her? And he went, well, no. And I said, well, okay, well, maybe, if you want to go home and say you've had this session and just say, are you okay with it? You'll probably find that she is fine with it. Otherwise, she may have said, you're happily married, you've been together for a long time. I said, but if she turns around and says, actually, no, do you know what? I would like some financial independence. Then that's a great thing from this session because you've recognised something and he explained he grew up seeing it with his parents. So that was the way he's done. His wife has never challenged him. And so he didn't know any different. And when he saw it, his face, bless him, was like, oh my goodness. And I was like, but what's happened? What you've got to see is this is a positive from this conversation. Because you're either going to go home and ask your wife, and she's going to say, I am happy with it, but feel really, really pleased that you've thought about her in this. Yeah. Or she's going to say, no, I'm not happy. Actually, I would like it changed. And then either way, you're willing to change. And that's the difference. I do believe people, not on purpose as such, do some of these, or have some of these, I guess, habits or duties or however, the way they're living their life and maybe not realise because no one's ever said. Yeah. And if they come forward at that point and say, look, I think I may be doing it and they're willing to have a conversation to see if it needs to change, then brilliant. But if you're, I've never had anyone disclose that saying I'm doing this at a level, because they're not going to. They will not do that.
I've got you. Yeah. And back to what you're saying about, I bet there's creep as well, right? I surely there's not many people who set out to maliciously think I'm going to go and, well, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there are lots of people who do that, but I'm sure there are also lots of people who they start out a little bit, and it builds, and then they've reached a line where that's not all right anymore.
Yeah. I mean, it happens over time. Obviously from the perpetrator side as well. I mean, psychologically, I don't know what goes on in people's minds. There's a lot of work that does go into that. And of course, people over time, they may have never had a really in-depth relationship and then they become really protective of that person and then it escalates. But we know what's right and wrong. We know in life that physical abuse is not okay. So anyone who physically abuses, there's no excuse. There's no excuse for any abuse. But I do understand what you're saying. If it's new and it's new emotions, and then all of a sudden they go, oh my goodness, I'm doing this to this person. Of course, if someone comes forward at that point and goes, this isn't okay, this behaviour of mine is not okay, I need to get counselling, I need to get help and change it. Those people deserve a chance to change it. Of course they do. But domestic abuse is a choice of one person over another. And, we're adults. We know what we're doing. We know that when things aren't right. And if someone's saying, if the person you're supposed to love or care about in whichever way that looks, says to you, I'm not happy, or please don't do that, you need to stop. Yeah. So, that's the thing. You can't brush that under the carpet.
Yeah, absolutely. Ace. Right, well, the time has flown by.
It's because I talk a lot.
I guess. Is there anything, you might not have an answer to this, but is there any? Are there any questions that you wish I'd asked you that I didn't ask?
No, I don't think so. I think we kind of touched on everything. I think I just really want to reiterate to anyone who's listening, it does take time. It is a journey, but doing nothing is not the answer. So doing something, even if you're a really small organisation that thinks we don't have any budget, I can also assure you that there are things you can do by having the free template and policy guidance in place. It's things like if someone comes forward and says I'm being abused, you need to take their perpetrator off on their HR records as the next of kin straight away. People don't even think about that. So if something happens, you're going to call the perpetrator. If they're being abused on their work mobile, can you get them a new SIM card? That's £5 a month. A small business can do that. So don't think that if you're small or you don't have a huge budget that you can't do anything, because you can. And I think I would encourage everybody to to even have a look at my website. It's domesticabuseeducation.co.uk. You can download the policy for free. On there, there's a tab uniquely named Sharon's Policy, which I always laugh at. But you can click on there and you just pop your email in. The reason we capture the email is so that when we do the annual reviews, people will get an updated version. We'll let them know what we've changed. And there's more information. But if somebody wants to reach out and just have a chat and say, what does it look like for me? What can we do? Then please do so. I'm more than happy to do that.
Yeah. Perfect. Again, you've preempted my question. I always end up by asking where people can find you, but you've already answered, right?
I've been on podcasts before, as you can tell. I talk a lot.
That's good. It's good. Yes, saves me.
But this one has been fabulous. I must say, this one has been very, very good. I've really enjoyed talking to you, and I hope obviously listeners have found it useful as well.
Yeah, and a real learning experience for me as well. Fascinated. Probably could have kept talking to you for another couple of hours.
You need to come on one of my courses. That's what you need to do.
I'll be there. All right then. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast,
Thank
and
you.
I'll speak to you again soon, I'm sure.
Brilliant. Thank you.
See ya.